Hello, and welcome back to our study of the book of Mark. Jesus continues in Gentile territory, and he finds himself once again in a desolate place with a crowd of hungry people. What will Jesus do? The disciples aren't sure. So let's read the passage and see what happens. But before we do, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel so that you can keep following along with me, and hit the notification button so you can be up to date on all the videos. All right, let's read. We're in Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 13, and it says, "During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance.' His disciples answered, 'But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?' 'How many loaves do you have?' Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground, and when he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, 'Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it.' Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side." Now, it seems like we've heard this story before. It also seems like Mark can't get over this theme of bread or loaves, right? And it's kind of like they didn't get it the first time he did the miracle of the loaves. It said when they were crossing the lake that they hadn't understood the miracle of the loaves. And so it's kind of like, well, let's do it again to see if you get the point. I told you once, you didn't get it. We're going to try it again, see if you get it this time. So here they find themselves in the same situation as before. Jesus is surrounded by a crowd of hungry people, and they're in a desolate place, and Jesus wants to feed them. There's no food out here in the middle of nowhere, the disciples protest. And once again, Jesus asks them to scrounge for whatever food they have, and what they come up with is 7 loaves and a few fish. But what is that to a crowd of 4,000? But once again, Jesus gives thanks to God for the little bit of food, and then everyone eats their fill with 7 baskets left over. So, some people, they like to get caught up in the numbers of the baskets, and like in the first feeding, there were 12 leftover baskets, and in this one, there's 7. And it's true, in the Bible, numbers have symbols attached to them, and 12 represents Israel, whereas 7 represents God. So make what you want to out of this. I think there is a little something to the numbers, but you don't need to make too much out of it. But if we're thinking about the numbers 12 and 7, I think that we could see that Jesus came for Israel, and he's identifying himself with God. Now we see in this section that he is still in Gentile territory. So we would be safe to assume that the majority of the people in this crowd are Gentiles. Whereas the first crowd, when he fed the 5,000, those were mostly Jews. And now he's fed this crowd of Gentiles a huge feast with a basket full of leftovers. Hey, but just a few verses earlier, there was that Greek Syrophoenician woman who was begging Jesus for crumbs from under the table. And if we were wondering if Jesus cared about the Gentiles, this story should lay that to rest. But we see here that no longer is it about crumbs falling to the dogs. The dogs have been invited to the table to share the same meal that the children share. And there is still enough left over. So we see once again that Jesus is enough. In God's kingdom, the crumbs can multiply to feed all who are hungry. Jesus has room for you at his table. He has plenty to provide for your needs. Or are you like the disciples, still unsure of Jesus' ability to take care of you? Well, we see that once again, the disciples have missed the point. Jesus provides the living bread to any who are hungry. Jesus is the bread of life, but the disciples still can't see it. But they don't oppose him. They keep stumbling along, and that should be a major encouragement to you and me. One of the most encouraging things about reading the Gospels is what kind of screw-ups the disciples were. That they see these things and they don't get it. They keep messing up. This should be encouraging to you and me because we often stumble around in the dark trying to see what God is doing, and we fail. But Jesus did not give up on the disciples, and he will not give up on you. Now, on the other hand, there were the Pharisees. And these guys, they're not impressed by Jesus. Sure, they've seen him do things, but they still want a sign. They want proof. You know, the funny thing is that proof negates faith. I mean, if you have proof, you don't have to believe. But Jesus wants people who have faith. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't evidence. There's been all these things happening. There's evidence. But they want this proof. And they want a sign like in the Old Testament. But more than that, they want Jesus to give them the sign that they want. They want to control what kind of Messiah Jesus is. Give us a sign. Give us one that will convince us. Give us one that we will believe. Oh, sure, you're healing all these people. Sure, you can feed crowds of people with nothing. Yeah, but what are you going to do to convince me, huh? You got to do it my way. Do what I want. And so they want him to give this sign, but even if he gave it to them, would it make a difference? No, their hearts are hard. You know, the Old Testament prophets provided many signs to the people, and they still got killed. Because some people, they just refuse to be convinced no matter what, unless God is going to do things exactly their way and exactly the way they want it. And you know what Jesus' response to these people is? Nah, not giving you a sign. A sign will do the Pharisees no good. It's not gonna have any positive results. So Jesus refuses to play their game. In the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, the rich man said to Abraham, "Hey, send Lazarus back to my brothers so that they won't come here." But Abraham says, "Hey, if they didn't believe the prophets or the scriptures, they're not going to believe even if someone comes back from the dead." So you see, some people just have hard hearts and they want God to do things their way, or they're just not going to be convinced. Don't play their game. It's best to just move on like Jesus did. He just said no, got in the boat, and went to the other side of the lake. There are some people that will work hard to have you stoned to death no matter what. You know what? Just leave them be and move on. Thank you for watching. See you next time.